Okie dokie. So the first thing we have to do to make this actually work is to make a change to the auto-generated entity model. And the change is we need to set this to JSON ignore. And the reasoning is that it's JSON serialization that doesn't work, not the entity framework lazy loading. So for the moment, I will just remove this, copy, Control H, change that to nothing. So we'll cause the error to occur here. So let's just compile and run this and check out Swagger for a second. Okay, so we go entities, get all of the entities, try it out, bam, we get an error. So the error is a self-referencing loop in the dynamic proxy, blah 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 blah. So the important thing is here, our object has an entity 2, which is a navigation property, so it's a predefined foreign key relationship thing. So this is our current object. Its entity 2 is the child, and then entity 1 on the child points back to the parent of entity 2, so it goes around in a circle. So this is, the problem here is about JSON not being able to render this, not about, or in fact the nuisance off JSON deserializer and serializer being able to render this. So the data itself should work fine. So if we go in back to Visual Studio and we put a line in here for debugging, kill the debugger and restart it. So when we do this and we trigger the same thing again, should get back to here. So our entity thingy should enumerate here. Yeah, okay. There we go. So the generated dynamic proxies are created by Entity Framework on the fly with the lazy loading. So if we look down here, we have, currently we are entity 1. Entity 1 has a child, and it's actually entity 2 is the child of entity 1. So ent 1's child is another dynamic proxy, and if we drill into this, this is actually entity 2. So entity 2, I think this points back to the parent, this one, but let's have a look. 1, parent, entity ID, okay. So ent 1 is the child, ent 2 is the parent, so it's a two-way relationship. So Entity Framework is actually working perfectly here for that. It's the JSON serialization we just saw that it cracks the SADs with. So if we now kill the debugger again, so Entity Framework read from that table perfectly well, and that's just the auto-generated table with no change. So if we now go back to in here, and we mark these with, what's it, JSON ignore, JSON ignore these properties. So ent 1 was the child of the current object, ent 2 is the parent of the child. I don't know what that one is, don't know what that one is. Let's just mark them all. So the link, entity link 1 and 2 is the other way that these tables map together. There's actually a many-to-many mapping table called entity link. I don't know why they did this two different ways. It's almost like their software can't understand the auto navigation properties, so they've actually implemented it in a second table as well as in the navigation properties. Anyway, we'll fire this up again, and what we'll find is one more curious thing than the other. I'll use Postman instead. So this is the same API call. We'll call this, should work this time, should not throw that error. Of course, demonstration fairy strikes again. Okay, so it looks like it loads there, but it's relatively slow because it's a very large query, in fact. There we go. So this is loading. It's interesting that Postman's actually slower. Alrighty, let's have a look back in here. Okay, so this is the ent1, sorry, the entity with the ID of 1. So this is the parentmost object. So we go down here, we see it's got ent ID equals 1. So that's that one. what we don't see here is ent1 and ent2, those children, because we set them to ignore. So if we wanted the web API just to return a list here of all the entities, and then we wanted to map those entities together in a hierarchical relationship back in entity framework style nested classes on the client end, we would have to build that relationship manually. Whether that is a problem for our intended use case or not, I'm not 100% certain. So what I'm thinking here is, if you're writing an API that's very low level, that's like get, set, put, the normal CRUD stuff, create, read, update, and delete, this works perfectly. This is not a problem, because killing the parent with its cascading delete does everything it needs to. Editing the parent, it all works fine. The problem arises if we want to map this parent-child relationship with the auto-navigation properties directly in an object that we strongly type straight out of the JSON that comes from the client. So if we tried to build this, and we got all of this data in one hit as the complete list of entities, and then we build our entity tree model, we'd have to make a new entity tree where we navigate through the first one of these, we check it, and we say its parent ID equals nothing, so we ignore it. So we go down to the second one, we find its parent ID equals 1, we then make it a child of entity ID equals 1 by going set ent1 equals whatever this is, where primary ent ID 1 ent ID equals 1, or something like that. It's kind of hard to explain, but so I don't know if that's a problem or not. Good news is this works. Bad news is we have to add some of these decorations to the classes that are auto-generated. There might be a way to do that in the configuration of the entity framework wizard thing that runs. I don't know. If we had to go through and do it manually on each one where it's a problem, and it might not be a problem for stuff that doesn't have nested self-references, it's probably okay. I don't know. We'd have to try it out on a heap more stuff to see if it works first.